The Chicago Bears' loss to the Minnesota Vikings on Sunday had two halves that felt very different. But when you go through the All-22 film, you might be surprised how similar the approach was in a lot of different ways, but things just started going the Bears' way with a little more aggression and a little bit more luck.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. Click that little bell to be notified as well to make sure you're keeping up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. On the show today, we go through an all-22 film breakdown of this Bears loss to the Vikings, as we normally do on the Tuesdays after a Bears game, win or loss. We review the tape, we go through and kind of pulled out some of the biggest and most notable observations. Normally, it's just me telling you what I've seen on the tape, but today, wanted to bring in another special guest to join us on the podcast today to get another voice on this all-22 film and kind of show that, it's not always just what I'm seeing, but not only other people seeing some of the same things that I'm seeing, but also maybe a slightly different perspective, seeing things slightly different as well. And so we'll be joined by Shawn Syed, who really, this is what he does, right? He focuses on all 22 film scheme breakdowns, and he primarily covers the Minnesota Vikings, but of course, going through this Bears-Vikings game, we're able to see a lot of what both teams were able to do, good and bad. So fun conversation, a lot of back and forth about what this teams have done, and we'll nerd out a little bit schematically on what we saw on the field on Sunday. So let's get right into it. We're joined now by Shawn Syed from the Daily Norseman. It's SB Nation's Minnesota Vikings page, and he is on Twitter at Syed Schemes, and he is great at breaking down the all-22 for the Minnesota Vikings, who of course played the Chicago Bears on Sunday, and has some great insights on what both of these teams were trying to do and what they were able to do in their matchup on Sunday. First of all, Shawn, how did you experience that game the first time, and also going back through it and in what felt like such wild swings back and forth? Sort of, did you find it typical Minnesota Vikings, or what was your sort of experience?
Lorin, really appreciate you having me on here. And this is my first year of being a lifelong Vikings fan. And it is no surprise that so many of these games are just such wild roller coasters. I think everyone felt really great kind of coming out, scoring 3 times in a row. And to just watch the Bears kind of slowly claw back, it was heart-wrenching, but I think indicative of, in this league that we all love so much. It's so rare to just have pure blowouts, kind of like that Bills game with the Steelers. So a roller coaster, and you take when you get the wins on it. So I think all Vikings fans are still at least happy getting a W on that.
Yeah, you have to, right? You got to take them where you can get them, even if they're not pretty. I want to start with that first half and those 3 touchdown drives, and how, clearly 2 things. One, the Vikings were going after the undrafted rookie free agent Jalen Jones in coverage, but then also just getting Justin Jefferson going offensively. What were some of the things the Vikings did to kind of get the ball his way? I know you had gone through some of the different ways they worked slot fades, but what kind of variety did you see from the Vikings offense when it came to him?
Yeah, I think Kevin O'Connell always uses the word activate. So how do we activate certain players and really certain plays throughout the game? I think early on they use tempo to their advantage. You see Kirk Cousins kind of make that little funny arm motion when they're going up tempo. And tempo can do a lot for an offense. It can get them on schedule if you're executing at a high level. It can get the defense at looks that you like, right? It's going to be harder for the defense to substitute out of a certain situation. And I think as a whole, the Vikings want to run you out of 2 high and then throw you out of 1 high, right? So they want to get Justin Jefferson, as you said, matched up on maybe a weaker link on the defense. And they were able to do that, right? They run those play action plays where Jefferson's kind of running a 10-yard outbreaker, or maybe even 20 when he's kind of in-man coverage the way they did against the Saints. And the Vikings are going to take that matchup every single time. And really, the first half and the second half, to me, I don't really think the Bears ever, quote, figured out the Vikings offense. I thought the Vikings were able to run successfully and throw successfully in different ways based on players, of course, in Justin Jefferson, but also really smart ways that were schemed up. The Vikings were obviously very successful on third down throughout the entire game, but little things like how they run their kind of little pick flat for Adam Thielen and kind of activating players that way through, scheme and high level play as well.
Yeah, when you say, I know we were talking about this a little bit before the show, like when you say that the Bears didn't necessarily figure out the Vikings in the second half or sort of take away Justin Jefferson in that intentional way, what do you see as what went differently? Like, why was it that the Vikings offense wasn't able to have the same success in the second half that it had with 17 straight completions by Kirk Cousins in the first?
Yeah, well, we always love to have 17 straight completions. Unfortunately, I don't think anyone's ever thrown a perfect game yet. Yeah. But really, what the Bears did is they made it harder, right? So they moved to more of that cover 2 look where it's going to force you to play kind of bottom up on offense because the defense is playing top down. And, I think a lot of quarterbacks are going to maybe not struggle with that look, but it forces a different sort of throw where the Bears did a good job kind of having that flat control with a cornerback on those rollouts or their movement passes as they would call it. And, that did kind of lead to that interception, right? I don't think football players are necessarily patient by nature. And, last week, you go anywhere on Vikings Twitter and you see the 2 circles that people drew on plays that, maybe you expect Cousins to kind of throw that ball a little deeper. And Cousins said it in his post-game interview where he let kind of pass plays kind of get into his head a little bit, where he should have just kind of thrown it short, but he threw it to that intermediate route and it ended up in an interception. Also, the Bears, I think part of having a good defense is having a good offense, right? So in that situation, the Vikings didn't have a lot of plays, I think, through most of the second half. There was a point where they only had, I think, 12 plays through a few of the drives there. But in the end, the Vikings had like 79 plays to the Bears 50 plays or something like that. But overall, I think using cover 2 and those, you hear the buzzword shell coverage, really just cover 2 looks as a way to challenge an offense. Are you going to be patient? Are you going to continue to pick up kind of gain after gain and be really patient and convert on third down, where fortunately for the Vikings, they did a lot in the game, but, may not be able to do it every single time.
Our friends at Tommy John Underwear know that you're most confident when you're most comfortable. So you can do everything better. If you name a problem with other underwear, Tommy John's has solved it. Tommy John's breathable, lightweight fabric has 4 times the stretch of competing brands, and they come with a no wedgie guarantee thanks to a non-rolling waistband and legs that never ride up. With over 17 million pairs sold, people love Tommy John underwear. That's why Tommy John says they don't have customers. They have fanatics. Plus, everything is backed with Tommy John's best pair you'll ever wear or it's free guarantee. Go to TommyJohn.com/lockedon right now for 20% off your first order. That's 20% off at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. That's TommyJohn.com/LOCKEDON, locked on. See site for details. When you saw like how the Bears started this game, a lot of that sort of like single high, like it felt to me like, I don't know, like not well prepared, or not being proactive. Like, I don't know. What do you think of the Bears approach in terms of like, it wasn't like the Vikings necessarily threw something brand new or unexpected offensively that maybe the Bears couldn't have seen coming. And it just struck me as like, why bother trying to go single high so much in the first half and be a little bit more predictable pre-snap versus post-snap, as opposed to like the second half when they seem like they rolled coverages a little bit more and went a little bit more to 2 deep looks?
Yeah, I think that NFL defensive coordinators still at their core, they want to stop the run, right? And not that you can't stop the run out of 2 high, but I think one default answer for defenses is to get that safety in the box and kind of press that run. And the Vikings, to my eyes, they have a strong offensive line. And of course, Dalvin Cook is a good running back. But you're right. I think through 5 games, it's not that the book is written on this Viking offense, but there is multiple clips of plays to show you maybe how to stop this Vikings offense or how to cause issue with it. And you see the 2-man snaps later in the game. And if you can get the Vikings 2-man coverage, maybe have 2 people over Justin Jefferson and force the Vikings to win elsewhere, I think that is a really smart strategy. But of course, that comes down to if you have those players, right? So it's, I think, easier for the Eagles to say, hey, look, we have Bradbury and Slay, and we're going to really, really get in your face and kind of cause problems all game. So if you're not as confident in your defensive backs, it could be a longer day. So it's a combination that, of course, wearing the Viking shirt on this podcast, we love to see it, right? Where you are in a conflict of, are we going to devote to stopping the run? Are we going to play a little lighter and kind of survive those gains? And, certainly the Vikings defense's answer is, look, we're going to let up 4 yards on these run plays sometimes so that we don't kind of allow a lot of one-on-one situations on the outside.
You mentioned the Bears, having the extra safety to try and stop the running game didn't necessarily work that well, even though it was kind of their emphasis. But it felt like maybe throughout the game, some back adjustments there, right? Where the Vikings get the running game going a little bit more consistently early on, and then the Bears try slanting some things inside and twisting linebackers a little bit more. Then the Vikings kind of adjust to that. What kind of back and forth cat and mouse game were you seeing in the Vikings ground game with this Bears defense?
Yeah, this was, I think, pretty fun to watch. There were a few times, as you said, the Bears kind of they take their defensive end, maybe their defensive tackle to that side and kind of slant them inside. It's a little bit more difficult, I think, when you're on the offensive line, if you're going to reach on those reach blocks on that wide zone or mid zone, and you just have the guy across your face. Now, one way to coach that on the offensive line is, look, just take the defensive lineman to where he is going. But what the Bears did that I liked is they had a linebacker kind of scrape and replace over the top of that. So it's a little bit hard to visualize, but really just think about that defensive line is slanting down. That linebacker is kind of replacing that spot where maybe that left tackle is kind of at. And, if you get enough penetration, you're going to cause problems. And I think it was the first play of the start of the second half where the Vikings offense, they add a tight end to that side to kind of take care of that. And I think the Vikings did get they are varied in their run game, but they had their kind of crack toss. They had their wind back where they want you to feel like it's wide zone, but they're really kind of pulling it the other way. Yeah. So the fight up front was pretty cool to see. The Vikings offensive line, who again, I think is pretty good, but the Bears, I think, did come out and say, hey, look, we're not just going to just let you beat us over here.
Yeah, which at times it felt like that's what they were doing in the first half, but slowly started to implement some of those other changes in there. What about the running game in the other direction? The Bears have been able to rely so much on their running game all season. The Vikings really shut it down. It seemed like there's some really great individual efforts from Dalvin Tomlinson and Harrison Phillips, just kind of some plus matchups for them on the interior against where the Bears have some weakness up front. But was it more complicated than that from your eyes, or was it just sort of, a couple of pretty good defensive tackles there winning their one-on-ones?
Yeah, I think that, I spent a lot of time kind of thinking about scheme and stuff, but really, like, players make plays. And Dalvin Tomlinson, I'm just not going to miss a chance to shout him out. And, Harrison Phillips, I think, does a great job as well. But that really was, at least to me, the core of it, right? If you can't get those kind of early down runs and you're already in 2nd and 8, you fall into 3rd down or you have penalties. The Bears' first play of the game, I know you run a guy out onto the field kind of late and get a delay of game. But yeah, to my eyes, the Vikings have a strong interior, and that stinks when you want to run the ball, right? So later on in the game, I think certainly, Justin Fields, I think, is just an amazing athlete, had some quarterback runs on design pass plays. And I think it was one of the touchdowns or almost touchdowns where they kind of get to the outside. But the Vikings are smart in the way that they handle the run game, right? They know that they have players that can take on double teams. And then on the outside, they usually have a cornerback kind of in a forced position where they're going to come up, and those guys want to tackle, right? So the Vikings were happy, I think, to see the Bears, who have a really good running attack, kind of come at them and, take them on one-on-one or really one-on-two in a lot of situations and come away with wins.
Yeah, I'm curious in the ways that you saw the Bears attack the Vikings. I mean, there was a lot of that empty, a lot of empty packages for Justin Fields, even more so than we've seen even in recent weeks. They got a little quick game going off of that too. I guess what kind of challenges does that present, and what kind of stood out from you with what the Bears did with Justin Fields?
I think that empty is really interesting because most teams have kind of default empty checks, right? There's not a ton that I think that teams usually do to empty the same way that if you draw up 2x2 on a chalkboard, that you have kind of your whole entire bag of coverages to go to. Some teams want to pressure out of empty, but at the same time, you do have to have an eye on Justin Fields in certain ways, right? So you can't just play 2-man the same way. I think later in the game, I think they had Brian Asamoah a few times kind of be that spy, but they played kind of one of coverages where it's kind of like man, but they have their linebackers and their safety kind of bracketed on those inside slot receivers. But the Bears offense, I know that people listening to Locked On Bears are tired of hearing about this, but sometimes it kind of feels like, when I play like Madden with my friends who don't really like know football or watch football, and it's just almost upsetting, right? To see that maybe the offense isn't kind of connected on a string, that they're not really like making sense in what they're doing. But at the same time, having some plays where, early on that, I think it was the first drive where they're running a slot fade and they have someone that looks like he's open in the end zone for whatever reason, whether it's route depth or just the throw that they can't connect. And, they didn't score a ton of points, right? 10 in the first half, 12 in the second half. Of course, you don't want to see 22 on the defensive side all the time, but Lorin, I don't know. I think if we had good answers, maybe we'd be getting paid a little bit more. But it's tough to see, Fields kind of, I think, being put in this situation over and over again.
This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline, the number one sports book we recommend for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline.net has all of the latest player developments, team matchups, news, in-depth articles, and analysis on every game you can find. That line in the Bears game started at +7 on BetOnline, shifted to +7.5. So if you got in on +7, you were right there for the push. If you were there at +7.5, would have been over the top there for the Chicago Bears. So that's why you got to get in early and make sure you're always on top of the latest at BetOnline, not just for Bears games, but all of your sports betting needs. The upcoming basketball season, the baseball playoffs, all the combat sports, soccer, tennis, hockey, you name it, they have it at BetOnline. Head on over to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more about all the different trends and action you need to know. BetOnline, where the game starts.
We thought it might take time for this Vikings team to kind of come together with, yes, the same tree of offensive system, but a new head coach, some new terminology of it, and a slightly different style of that same offense. But all of a sudden, they're 4-1. It's not necessarily like a super firm, like dominant 4-1, but it's a 4-1 nonetheless. Where's sort of your level of confidence in this Vikings team right now? I mean, obviously, it seems to be on the playoff track, but beyond that, like, are you full steam ahead, or are you kind of cautiously optimistic?
So I feel like all the other Vikings writers have kind of beat out the optimism from me, but I am cautiously optimistic. I think that I try not to be too hyperbolic, but I think KOC is really, really good. I think Kevin O'Connell calls a good game. He sees issues, right, in that Eagles game, and he comes back the next game with answers, right? If we're beating man coverage in one game, we're gonna find different ways to get that. And I think you can go back and forth on, well, how important is culture actually? But I know you've seen another Vikings head coach with a red face on the sidelines a lot. And the way, KOC, I think, answers questions. And it's interesting to see how the other players really parrot what he says in interviews. So to me, it's an indication, again, it's like a soft skill, but an indication that the players are internalizing what the head coach is saying. But at the same time, yeah, look, 4-1 is great. I think this is not the softer part of their schedule, but they are happy to have, 3 divisional games at home. I'm concerned for later in the season when they have to go on the road 3 times for those divisional games in the same way. They have the Dolphins coming up. They got the Bills, the Cowboys, but, they do have the inside track at that division. And I know that me and you are going to have no hard time kind of rooting against the Packers, but, maybe we can kind of group up on that one. Just, I think they can take a backseat for a year. And if Kirk Cousins can sustain kind of strong play, keep making good decisions, I trust Kevin O'Connell to put him in good positions. And, defense will let up points. I think they will continue to let up points, but opportunistic defense, you saw Cam Dantzler make that play at the end. And, I'd like to say the sky's the limit. I don't think the sky is necessarily the limit, but I do think the Vikings certainly are a playoff team to my eyes.
I mean, do you think opportunistic defense is sustainable defense? Giving up, I mean, obviously the Packers game in week 1 was kind of the anomaly there, but every other game has been in the 22 to 25 point range. Is that sustainable, or do you kind of anticipate that as they go on, like Ed Donatell and this Vic Fangio scheme can be kind of complicated to pick up quickly and earlier? Is there a confidence that as the season goes on, they can settle into that a little bit more and bring down the points, or do they have to keep being an opportunistic defense to maybe make up for some deficiencies on the back end there?
Well, that's a great question. I think that football is a small sample size sport, right? 16 or 17, however many games, is what we have to look at, but it's not the same as, right, baseball where there's 162. And so I don't think that opportunistic defense is necessarily sustainable, right? I do not know how many times you can bank on Cam Dantzler just taking the ball out of another player's hands, right? Or those things. But at the same time, right, you make a good point in that on both sides of the ball, the Vikings are, quote, new to the scheme, right? You know, Kirk Cousins he played with O'Connell before when O'Connell was a QB coach, I think, in Washington. But, you know, it's still an early game while he's in the system, the same way that those defensive guys are, right? So the hope, I think, is that, look, if we can't just get that game-winning turnover to kind of seal a victory or really create a win on the defensive end, you know, this is a team that has, to me, a really good special teams unit, maybe not the best special teams performance against Chicago, but I do think that, you know, the more games you spend in the system, it's going to be better. So, you know, you learn, not that you learn more from a win from a loss, but I think it's maybe easier to build off of a win where people are still feeling good in the locker room. And, you know, for all you Bears fans, right? Like, it was a flag call away from really the Bears winning this game, right? Yeah. And it's really like 3 or 4 things kind of bouncing one way from the Vikings having really one win. So is it the sustainability of the defense? I think we can go back and forth on for sure. There are good players. I think, you know, maybe there are holes in the secondary that offenses can continue to take advantage of. But, you know, teams are going to score points in this league. And the hope, I think, is that the Vikings can outscore some teams as well.
Yeah, if you can keep stacking up 150-yard games with Justin Jefferson, you can go pretty far in a league like this. Shawn, really appreciate all the time and all of your expertise. Let everybody know where they can find your work and what kind of work they can expect from you.
I appreciate that so much, Lorin. You know, just follow me, guys, at Syed Schemes. That's SYED Schemes. You know, I try and do as much about through the whole NFL. Just love this game so much. I'm writing for the Daily Norseman this year. You know, if you guys just want to come across to enemy territory, see what's going on with the Vikings as they kind of continue to push for that division title, give me a follow. Just try and do as much all 22 as I can. Try and make this game as simple for everyone and give us just more to watch and love.
We'll definitely have to circle back when we get to January now, like mid-January, it feels like by the time we get to week 18 this season. Shawn, really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Lorin. Appreciate it.
Thanks again to Shawn Syed from the Daily Norseman and on Twitter at Syed Schemes for joining us on the podcast today. If you enjoyed our conversation, make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. It's a little bit of a condensed week for us here, so we're going to have a quick turnaround. We'll have your Washington Commanders game preview coming up here real soon, and we'll break down what happens on Thursday, on Friday as well. We'll put together a game plan here for how the Bears can beat the Commanders as well. So a little bit condensed. We'll kind of jam everything in here as we can. So make sure you're tuning in and getting your listens in before Thursday's game so you don't have to do cramming on Thursday to be ready to go in that one. In the meantime, I hope you'll keep checking out Locked On Bears, making it your first listen each and every day. If you're looking for your second listen today, I was on the Locked On Minnesota Sports podcast yesterday, Locked On Sports Minnesota podcast yesterday, the Minnesota Football Party, talking about the Chicago Bears and the Vikings, having some fun with Luke Braun, Arif Hassan, Luke Inman, and Sam Ekstrom, really kind of going around the horn there with some fun guys. And Arif and I exchanged roasts at the end of that appearance, and you can tell me which one of us you think ended up winning, roasting each other kind of back and forth at the end there. We have a lot of fun with those guys. We're your team every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Come on back tomorrow for even more, and come on back for that next opportunity to bear down.